All right, everyone get ready, because today we're going deep into the world of education,
Yeah.
specifically how schools are trying to adapt
Yeah.
to the crazy changes of the 21st century.
Yeah.
We've got a really cool university-level course document all about educational management to help guide us.
Cool.
It's going to be like your cheat sheet to understanding the toughest challenges and biggest opportunities
Uh-huh.
that schools are facing today.
Okay.
And hey, maybe you could even use some of what you learn here
Right.
to win your next argument
Yeah.
about the good old days of school.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I thought was super interesting
Yeah.
is how this document emphasizes the constant pressure that schools are under.
Yeah. They talk about it as like internal and external environments, which is
Yeah.
kind of a helpful way
Yeah.
to think about all the different things that are affecting schools.
So it's not just about what's happening inside the school building.
Right.
Like, what are some examples of these external forces that are really shaking things up out in the world?
Well, you've got things like demographics changing. Like if a school district gets a big influx of new students
Yeah.
from different cultures,
Right.
it can completely change how they have to approach the curriculum or what resources they need.
Wow.
And then you've got technology, which is obviously constantly changing
Yeah.
and forcing schools to adapt.
Right.
And then the source even mentions something like global migration patterns,
Oh, wow.
which I thought was really interesting.
Migration. That's not something you typically think about
I know, right?
when it comes to schools.
Right.
How does that even play into things?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine a school district that suddenly has to accommodate all these new students
Yeah.
who maybe don't speak the language
Right.
or have different cultural norms.
Wow.
You know, it's a real challenge to prepare all students for a globalized world, and it really starts
Yeah.
right there in the classroom.
Right there in the classroom. Now, I noticed that the source
Mm-hmm.
seems to really emphasize the role of the principal.
Mm-hmm.
What are they saying about how principals
Yeah.
need to change
Uh-huh.
in this kind of dynamic environment?
Basically, they're saying that principals need to become like masters of adaptation, almost like chameleons.
Okay.
They have to embrace technology.
Uh-huh.
They have to always be learning new things themselves.
Right.
And then they have to model that behavior
Yeah.
for the entire school.
Yeah.
It's this idea of lifelong learning,
Uh-huh.
not just for the students, but for the school leadership, too.
Yeah. I'm trying to picture my old principal trying to figure out, like,
But no.
the latest TikTok trends, and I don't know
Right.
how well that
Yep.
would go over.
Yeah,
But I get what they're saying. It's that whole lead
Yeah.
by example thing.
exactly.
Now, one thing that really jumped out at me in this source was this whole idea of a skills gap.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
It's basically this gap that exists between what schools traditionally teach students
Yeah.
and the skills that employers are actually looking for these days.
Mm.
It's like we're preparing students for a world that doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
Think about it. We're still focusing so much on things like
Yeah.
rote memorization and standardized tests.
Mm-hmm.
But in the real world, employers want people who can think critically, be creative, and work well on teams.
So we're basically churning out all these graduates
Right.
who could ace a multiple choice test,
Exactly.
but can't solve a real world problem to save their lives.
Yep, that's it. And what I thought was even more interesting is that the source points out how some students are actually starting to recognize this gap
Oh, wow.
themselves
Yeah.
and take things into their own hands.
Cool.
They're like using online resources and teaching themselves to
Well,
fill in the gaps
Yeah.
that traditional education is missing.
It's almost like they're becoming these
Yeah.
little mini change agents themselves.
Exactly. Going out and finding the skills they need to thrive. It makes you wonder, are we headed towards a future where traditional education
Right.
just becomes obsolete?
That's the big question, isn't it? Now, going back to these external forces that are shaping education, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how migration in particular
Okay.
is impacting schools. What would culturally diverse learning look like in your ideal school?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's all about creating an environment where every student feels seen and heard and valued,
Yeah.
where their unique backgrounds and experiences are celebrated and not just tolerated.
Right.
You know, where the actual curriculum itself reflects the richness and diversity of the world. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there.
Okay.
It's about moving beyond just basic tolerance and actually creating an inclusive and equitable learning environment.
Yeah.
And speaking of preparing students for a diverse and changing world,
The source talks about something they call 21st century skills. What are your initial thoughts
yeah,
when you hear that term?
to be honest, I'm always a little wary
I hear you.
of buzzwords in education.
Yeah.
But I am curious to hear what exactly they consider 21st century skills
Uh-huh.
and if schools are even equipped to teach them.
So they break these skills down into three main categories:
Okay.
learning and innovation, digital literacy,
Okay.
and career and life skills.
Yeah.
And you remember that skills gap we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
This is where it really becomes important
Yeah.
to make sure that what's being taught is aligned with the skills
Right.
students need.
So give me the breakdown. What exactly falls under each of those categories?
Well, learning and innovation includes things like critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and problem solving.
Okay.
So basically all the skills you need to not just learn stuff, but to actually analyze it, apply it, and come up with new ideas.
So not just memorizing facts, but actually knowing what to do with them.
Exactly.
Gotcha. What about digital literacy?
Yeah.
That one seems pretty self-explanatory.
It does, but it's actually more than just knowing how to use the latest gadgets.
Okay.
It's about being able to navigate the online world safely and responsibly, to critically evaluate information,
Right.
to be able to tell what's real and what's fake,
Yeah.
and use technology as a tool for learning and communication.
So knowing how to avoid those clickbait articles.
Exactly.
Pretty essential life skills these days.
Mm.
All right. What about career and life skills?
Okay, so those are the skills that are going to help students thrive in pretty much all aspects of their lives. We're talking about things like adaptability, initiative, communication, leadership, and cross-cultural understanding.
Wow. So that's
It's a lot, right?
It's a lot. I'm curious, which of those skills do you feel most prepared for?
Yeah.
And where could you maybe use a little work?
That's a great question. I think that's something we should all be thinking about,
Yeah.
no matter what our age or profession is.
Right.
Now, going back to the source, they talk about this framework for managing change called the Shewhart cycle. Have you ever heard of that?
I feel like I've heard of it,
Okay.
but I definitely need a refresher.
Okay.
What is it, and how does it apply to schools?
Basically, it's a cycle for continuous improvement.
Okay.
It stands for plan, do, check, act. And it gives you a really structured way to approach any kind of problem or implement something new.
Yeah, I definitely see how that would be helpful.
Yeah.
In a school setting, can you give me an example?
Yeah.
Let's say a school's trying to address low student engagement,
Yeah.
which we all know is a big issue.
Huge.
How could they use the Shewhart cycle to deal with that?
Perfect example. So in the plan phase,
Okay.
they would bring together all the stakeholders, teachers, administrators, students, parents, everybody. Wow.
And they would really dig into the problem. They'd analyze data, brainstorm solutions, come up with a clear plan.
Really had a deep understanding of the problem
Yeah, exactly.
before taking any action.
Exactly. Then comes the do phase,
Okay.
where they put the plan into action. So that might mean training teachers in new methodologies or changing up the curriculum,
Right.
or even investing in new resources.
So the wheels are in motion, but it doesn't stop there, right?
Nope. Now it's time for the check phase.
Okay.
This is where they gather all the data to see if those changes are working.
Right.
So they'd be looking at things like, are students more engaged?
Yeah.
Are grades improving? Are attendance rates up?
It's like they're scientists running an experiment.
Exactly. And that leads to the final phase, act.
Okay.
Based on that data,
Yeah.
they decide whether to stick at the plan, change things up,
Yeah.
or even scrap it and start all over again. The important thing is to use the data.
Right. To make informed decisions.
And always keep improving. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on,
Yeah.
I noticed the source keeps mentioning this phrase, triangle of success.
Oh, yeah.
What's that all about?
It's their secret recipe for effective change leadership.
Okay.
And I think you're going to find it really insightful. But first, let's take a quick break.
Right.
We'll unpack it when we come back.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about this idea of a triangle of success for leading change in schools.
Yes, the source made it sound super important, so I'm definitely ready to hear what those key ingredients are.
Okay, well, get ready to take some notes because they say the triangle is made up of knowledge, skills, and attitude.
Okay, so maybe not as groundbreaking as I was expecting,
Right.
but I'm sure when we dig deeper,
Yeah,
it'll get more interesting.
exactly. So when they talk about knowledge, they're not just talking about having the right degrees or knowing all the latest education jargon. They're talking about really understanding how schools work.
Yeah.
Knowing what students and staff need, and seeing the big picture of the whole educational landscape.
So a principal can't just be a manager. They need to be like a strategic thinker.
Right.
A visionary.
Exactly. They need to be able to connect the dots, anticipate challenges, and create a plan for the future.
But vision alone isn't enough, right?
Yep. That's where skills come in.
Okay, so what kind of skills we're talking about here? I imagine it takes a lot of different tools to navigate all the changes happening in education.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
The source highlights communication, collaboration, problem-solving, decision-making, all the usual suspects. But they also emphasize something that I think is often overlooked.
Oh, what's that?
Emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence, yeah. That's a big one these days. Why is that so important for school leaders in particular?
Well, think about it. A principal is dealing with a ton of different personalities and perspectives. Teachers, students, parents, administrators, community members, you name it.
Oh, yeah.
So they need to be able to read people, understand their emotions, build trust, and deal with conflict effectively.
Sounds like they need to be part diplomat, part therapist,
Well, I know, right?
part superhero, all rolled into one.
Exactly. But there's one more piece of the triangle, and this is what really brings it all together.
Okay, what is it?
Attitude.
Attitude. I have a feeling this is where the source is going to get into that whole mindset
Yes.
piece of change leadership.
You got it. They say it's not enough to just have the knowledge and skills.
Right.
You also have to have the right attitude.
Yeah.
You need to be proactive, resilient, and positive.
Especially when things get tough.
Exactly. They even quote Stephen Covey, who talks about achieving private victory before you can achieve public victory.
Oh, I like that. So you have to master yourself, develop the right habits and principles.
Yeah.
Before you can go out and effectively lead others.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But let's get practical for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about the why and the how of change leadership. But what about the what?
Yeah.
What should schools actually be focusing on to prepare students for this crazy world?
That's the million-dollar question, and this is where the source really gets down to business.
Okay.
They emphasize student achievement, of course, but also creating a positive school culture, solving problems effectively, and engaging the community.
It's not just about what happens inside the school, right?
Right. It's about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And they especially highlight the need for curriculum change.
Curriculum change, oh, that's always a hot topic.
You're telling me.
What are some of the key takeaways from the source on that?
They actually lay out 7 key changes they think need to happen.
7. All right, hit me with it.
First up, expanding the thrust of subjects. That means going deeper, making connections, and finding more real-world applications.
So it's less about cramming facts and more about developing critical thinking skills.
Exactly.
I like it. What's next?
Next is increasing curriculum integration.
Okay.
So breaking down those subject silos and helping students see how everything connects.
So instead of learning history, science, and literature in isolation,
right?
They start to see how those subjects relate to each other and to the real world.
Exactly. They also talk about emphasizing in-depth coverage. So focusing on really understanding a few things rather than just scratching the surface of a bunch of different topics.
Quality over quantity, love it.
Right. What else? Let's see. They also advocate for using natural sources.
What does that mean?
Bringing the outdoors into the classroom.
Cool.
Hands-on experiences, connecting learning to the natural world.
Oh, that's refreshing. Getting kids out of those stuffy classrooms.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, they highlight focusing on high-level thinking skills, like critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, collaboration, all those 21st century skills we talked about earlier.
Makes sense. If those are the skills employers want, then schools need to be teaching them.
Exactly. All right, 2 more. Number 6 is using multiple evaluation methods.
Okay.
So moving beyond standardized tests and using a wider range of assessments to get a better picture of what students are learning.
Right.
And finally, expanding choices for teachers.
Okay.
Which basically means giving teachers more freedom and flexibility to design their curriculum.
So empowering teachers to be more creative and responsive to their students.
Exactly. It's a big shift from the traditional way of doing things.
Yeah.
And the source talks about this transition from an old paradigm of school administration to a new one.
Okay, I'm always up for a paradigm shift.
Right.
What's the difference between the old and the new?
Well, the old paradigm was very top-down, bureaucratic, focused on control and compliance.
Like a factory model.
Exactly.
Churn them out. One size fits all.
Yeah. But the source says that doesn't work anymore. Right. We need a new paradigm, something more collaborative, more decentralized, more focused on empowerment.
So less top-down control and more shared leadership. What does that look like in practice?
It means recognizing that everyone in the school community has a role to play in making change happen.
Yeah.
Teachers need to be able to innovate and adapt. Students need to be active participants in their learning.
Right.
And parents and community members need to be involved.
So it's a more organic approach to the education.
Yeah.
But it also seems like it would require a whole new set of leadership skills.
Absolutely. And the source talks about that, too. They say we need leaders who are visionary, collaborative, and emotionally intelligent, all those qualities we were talking about earlier.
It's all connected.
Right. But I know what you're thinking.
What am I thinking?
How do these big ideas actually play out in the real world?
Exactly.
Well, the source actually gives us some concrete examples.
Okay, good.
And that's what we'll talk about after the break.
All right. So glad we're back because I really want to hear about how these big ideas are actually playing out in schools. Does the source give us any real-life examples?
Oh, yeah.
To help illustrate these concepts?
They actually use a case study of a school that's dealing with low student engagement to show how the Shewhart cycle can work in a real situation.
Oh, that's perfect.
I mean, student engagement is something that pretty much every school struggles with.
Exactly. So paint me a picture. What was happening at this school?
Okay.
And how did they approach the problem?
So you've got this school where students are just going through the motions, no excitement, no passion for learning, maybe even skipping class.
Right.
Or just not really trying. They knew they had to make a change. So they decided to use the Shewhart cycle to tackle the problem.
So they started with the plan phase, right?
Yeah.
What did that look like?
They brought together this team of teachers, administrators, students, even parents, to brainstorm and really dig into the issue. They looked at all sorts of data, like attendance records, grades. They even did student surveys to try to understand why students weren't engaged.
So they really took that data-driven approach.
Exactly, like detectives gathering evidence.
What did they learn from all that planning and investigating?
They found that a lot of students felt like what they were learning had nothing to do with their lives.
Right.
It wasn't relevant. The teaching methods weren't engaging. So based on that, they came up with a plan to completely revamp their approach.
So what did this new approach look like? What kinds of things did they change?
They decided to bring in more project-based learning, where students could apply what they're learning to real-world problems. And they started doing more hands-on activities and making the classroom more interactive. It was really a shift from teacher-centered to student-centered learning.
That's a pretty big shift.
Yeah.
How did they make sure that all those changes actually happened?
That's where the do phase came in. They gave teachers lots of training to help them adapt to these new ways of teaching. And they even changed the school schedule to allow for more project-based learning.
That's commitment. So the plan was in motion, but the big question is, did it actually work?
Right.
What happened in the check phase?
So they kept collecting data. Attendance, grades, student feedback, all of it. They wanted to see if the changes were actually making a difference.
Were students more engaged?
Yeah, and their learning experience better overall.
And what did the data tell them? Did this new approach actually make an impact?
The results were pretty amazing. Attendance went up, grades improved, and most importantly, students said they were more motivated.
Oh, wow.
And felt more connected to what they were learning.
That's fantastic.
It wasn't an overnight success. Yeah.
But they saw real progress over time.
So mission accomplished, right? They just declare victory and move on.
Not quite.
Okay.
Remember, the Shewhart cycle is about continuous improvement.
Right.
So they celebrated their wins, of course, but they also looked at the data to figure out how they could get even better.
I love that. It's that constant cycle of reflecting and refining to make things even better. Now, thinking beyond this specific case study, what are some of the biggest takeaways you think our listeners should keep in mind about the future of education?
I think the most important takeaway is that education can't just stay the same.
You're right.
It has to keep evolving to meet the demands of this crazy world we live in.
Yeah, the world is changing so fast.
The source emphasizes being bold and innovative, questioning how we've always done things, and always putting students first.
I like that. And it's not just about what happens inside the school building either. The source really highlighted
The need to get the community involved.
Yeah, break down those walls between school and the real world.
Absolutely. This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about.
I'm glad.
From those 21st century skills to the importance of change leadership to using data to make better decisions.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new perspective on the challenges and the opportunities facing education today.
That's what we like to hear. And remember, this is just the start of the exploration. Hopefully it's inspired you to keep learning and digging deeper into these ideas.
You've definitely achieved that. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder. The source talked a lot about the importance of changing the curriculum. What subjects or skills do you think schools should really prioritize in the years to come? Think about that as you continue your own deep dive into the future of education. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.